Mikey Boy Afton. He's the main character of the series, except when he isn't. To be honest, he's probably the most fleshed out character in the series, pun absolutely intended. Considering all of his motives and reasoning, he definitely seems the most dynamic and complicated, but also like the most established. He isn't like William, where we kind of have to assume or make up a lot of explanations to get from point A to point B with him. Michael just kind of works. Granted, there is some arguing, so he isn't exactly cut and dry, but nothing really in Fnaf is for the most part. So I think we're going to do a bit of a hybrid character study theory video here to try and go over why I think this is Michael's character, and actually analyzing what that character is. Disclaimer, this will be warped through my perspective of how I understand the series and how I interpret clues. If you can't handle it, and my interpretation isn't perfectly what you want, I'm sorry. I start with what game he was introduced in, but Mike's been introduced like 3 times. Mike Schmidt is heavily implied to be an alias of his, and that's the first ever game. There's the Foxy bro, then there's actual Michael Afton and sister location. Beyond that, he's heavily implied to be the protagonist of FNAF 3, one of the main characters in the survival logbook. Yes, a activity book has main characters. This is FNAF. And obviously he's the player character of FNAF 6 because honestly, who else would it be? Let's start with the first chronological appearance of Michael. Michael really starts out on a sour note in this one. He's a bit of a jerk all the way through, but this is still the base of his later sources of characterization. In the survival logbook and his monologue, you can still see some of this kid leak through, so we have to cover pretty thoroughly. This Michael is snarky. He's making fun of his brother constantly, but more importantly, we can notice 2 things. He rarely speaks in a direct or blunt manner. Hey guys, I think the little man wants to give Fredbear a big kiss. Which really shows how roundabout he can be at times. He doesn't say, let's put the kid in the bear's mouth. He says, let's give him a big kiss. Almost every word is indirect. It's slightly roundabout. He's making fun of his brother first and foremost for his own humor and his buddy's amusement. He's not really seemingly trying to torment the crying child himself. The crying child is just a way to get a funny gag out of the moment. There is the line, he knows you hate it here. But we don't get any implication that Michael really hated the crying child specifically in a personal way. It really just seems like he has a ton of fun messing with this kid. This is heavily reinforced by the ending of the game, when he's super sorry and is just trying to call out to the crying child for forgiveness. I know Sister Location may seem like his personality was switched to being very somber, but it seems more melancholy. I mean, even after he's just recovered from being puppeted by his sister and her flunkies and having all of his organs ripped out and used as a skin suit, a little bit of that snarky humor still somehow snuck in there. What I'm particularly focusing on is when he mentions that the Sister Location crew mistook him for William. He does this weird little like laugh sigh thing.
They thought I was you.
Like, he finds the idea of them mistaking him for William kind of unbelievable or ridiculous. Like, that's kind of funny, right? They thought I was you. He also references the put back together line, which is just one of the many clues that Fredbear is William, or at least the original Fredbear is. I don't know what the FNAF World one is, but in this context, William is Fredbear. Also, this Michael is still pretty roundabout in how he talks about things. There are some moments where he's a little bit more blunt, but he's definitely not straightforward about any given topic here. Once again, he doesn't just say, oh, they mistook me for you, now I'm going to come find you. He goes on this big, rambling, weird monologue. Now you may be wondering, why do I keep bringing up that he's not blunt and in fact he's roundabout? That's because of this frustrating fellow on the couch right here. I made 2 whole videos on the whole topic of the crying child not being the kid who runs away and Michael not being the person on the couch. So welcome to the third half part of this demi-trilogy, I guess. Yes, I did just make up the word demi-trilogy. So instead of repeating myself, I'm going to try and add new stuff to this here. Something I saw that sort of become a double-edged sword for talking about this whole matter is the name of the sprite that's watching TV. Man sitting. This debunks my initial premise, which was this is Miss Afton watching TV. However, it doesn't contradict my alternate premise that Henry was asked to keep track of Michael and sort of babysit him. Obviously, Michael's not a baby. He's there to keep track of Michael, who's been running away lately. This would also serve double purpose because it makes sure he's not there to see William kill Charlie, which would help William get away with it. Not only is that super thematically tied into the entire game, and also references Henry's dialogue about not being there for Charlie, which, if you think about it, doesn't really make sense. Why would he not be at his own diner working on the robots or inventing something new? It implies there was something else he was doing or was something restricted him that prevented him from helping Charlie. This also fixes the age issue of the title Man Sitting. If the crying child were still alive and running away, then Michael will be the same age or younger than the one we see in FNAF 4. If that's the case, given the fact that he's way shorter than all of the adults in the cutscenes in the same building with the same sense of scale, which actually relatively is pretty good considering that Scott can't keep a sprite the same color for most minigames. If the crying child is still alive, Mike is not a man. He is at best an early mid-teen. I also like to bring up that Charlie actually wears a gray shirt. I know Michael does too, but he also wears a purple shirt in the prior minigame, so Mike doesn't really have an established shirt color. Honestly, I think the whole shirt color thing is dumb. But I just want to point that out that, oh, he wears a gray shirt and that's like only Michael's thing, except it's not. But the biggest thing is that this person on the couch doesn't talk like any of the appearances of Michael, including the one that's in the survival logbook, which was released after this. This isn't how Michael talks or acts. And also, what kid talks to their drunk, abusive dad this way? Not to mention, this just doesn't fit the crying child here. The crying child, it breaks down when he's afraid of things and is reliant on his plushie, which he squeezes and loves and all that, and gives him instructions for everything he does and informs him of so much. And yet we're supposed to believe this kid, who hates Fredbear's, by the way, he hates one of the main locations he could be running off to in this hypothetical scenario, would break the window to run out past something that was out there with bare feet. That does not fit his character. But Michael would totally do something like this. We know he's a bit of a troublemaker based on the fact that he tampers with the animatronics several times, he puts his brother near an animatronic's mouth, and also he just kind of stands up to the murder friends of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in general. Michael is relatively fearless, so him not listening and running off is completely in character. I can see Mike locking his door, breaking a window, and kicking Spooky McBear's shins and running off to an unexplained location. I can't see the crying child doing that. What does Mike, or the runaway kid in general, if you don't believe it's Mike still, get in trouble for in this cutscene? Locking his door and breaking a window to run off. The Fnaf 4 room has no windows, has multiple entrances, and that can't lock and that can't be closed at the same time. That's right. I think Scott figured out a way to make the stupid layout of the Fnaf 4 room actually make sense and have a lore-relevant explanation. I'm serious, it doesn't matter what you think this kid is. This is like a perfect parallel to the Afton family, whoever this is. Which is one of the many things that disproves that this is William walking to a goddamn kid's room to kidnap him, which just doesn't make any sense anyway. Following the connection, based on the gameplay of FNAF 4, we can safely assume, whether it's real or not, that these nightmares or whatever is happening is occurring after the minigames of FNAF 4. We can see this pretty clearly in the flowers and IV drip, which, unless the dream was a premonition, doesn't make sense unless the crying child's already been hospitalized. Now, this is a little bit more of a stretch, but I did think it would be worth pointing out. In FNAF 4's minigames, we see the crying child with a very different bedroom than the one we see in the gameplay of FNAF 4. And such location confirms twice over that these are real rooms. This is not something fabricated. In fact, we can even see the old room in the map of such location in the breakthrough room, which physically makes no sense in scale, but we're going to ignore that because I feel like that's just supposed to show it's underneath the FNAF 4 location. Why that's important is it shows he had that one-door bedroom with no windows already up until he died, which if the lore is that he's being moved out of that room into a new one, or whatever's happening here, and it's just a weird perspective, then we have this plot hole of, wait, when was he in the FNAF 4 room? Because that room is real, and he had to be in there at some point. But on the week he dies, he still has his original room, which just fundamentally doesn't line up. But then again, that is a little subject to just weird Easter egg shenanigans. Like I said, the breaker room's layout makes no physical sense unless the FNAF 4 bedroom is the size of the entire FNAF 4 house. Which, oh man, that's completely absurd. If we are meant to take this as the layout is actually important, then the crying child fundamentally can't be the runaway kid. Not to mention, furthering this whole idea of it being after FNAF 4's minigames, all the animatronics parallel the movements of the FNAF 1 animatronics, and also Phone Guy's audio is hidden as an Easter egg. Sure, maybe this is like foreshadowing in a really weird way, but once again, I don't really think this is supposed to be like a premonition or something like that. I think the idea is what the gameplay of FNAF 4 is might be a nightmare Mike has based on childhood experiences mixed with his time at FNAF 1. That's the best way I can rationalize it, but there's really no easy way to make FNAF 4's gameplay fully make sense. Furthering the connection between Mike and the whole FNAF 4 gameplay is his drawing of Nightmare Fredbear in the survival logbook, which shows that at some point or at some time, he met Nightmare Fredbear. I don't care if it's a dream or not, he saw that thing. What makes this complicated is that the activity book and the faded text asks Michael or someone about dreams. So we don't know which one of the two he's responding to. Sometimes the connections are a little bit less direct, where you might be able to argue they aren't aware of each other, like the gravestone and then the faded text to write my name over Mike's drawing. But there are explicit moments where they seem to be aware of each other. Two of the examples of Mike acknowledging Cassidy, or at least the logbook spirit in general's existence, is writing, "For real value, go to this page," and it's one of the clues to Cassidy's name. And another one is writing 817, the time code to Cassidy's name. Another one that goes the other way around is that Cassidy says, "Was your favorite phone a purple plastic telephone?" The crying child's favorite toy should be Psychic Friend Fredbear, from how the game explains things with the whole, "these are my friends," etc. Like the whole narrative of Fnaf 4, these toys are super important to him and kind of dictate his life. Not to mention we never see a plastic phone in his minigame version, which I feel like if Scott was trying to explain this with the same room, he would at least have some of the toys there. I mean, there's not even a closet in the Crying Child's version of the room in the minigames. But Mike's favorite toy, being a purple plastic telephone, is actually really funny foreshadowing for his time listening to Phone Guy ramble on over his nights as a security guard. It makes more sense for Mike to reference something like that than the Crying Child. So I think Cassidy is talking about Michael here. Why that's important is because the activity book asks about recent dreams, which means if Michael's talking about Nightmare Fredbear and he saw him recently, and he's already gone through Sister Location on the logbook, that would mean the FNAF 4 gameplay is after Sister Location and presumably FNAF 1. If he's responding to Cassidy's question, then that means he saw someone at any time. It really doesn't matter. I'd also like to go over the fact that Mike and the Crying Child do seem to be implied to be separate people, and the whole encyclopedia made further confusion about that. Oh, maybe it's just that he saw Fredbear and blah blah blah, whatever, Crying Child. But we see pretty clearly in the logbook that there's a separate spirit who says the party was for me, I can't see, and I'm scared, which are like the summary of the Crying Child's character. The Crying Child is someone helpless and incapable of doing anything to defend himself. He had a party, it was his birthday, that was supposed to be for him. The altered text never responds to Michael, but it does respond to the faded text. What can you see? I can't see. I can hear sounds. The party was for you. It was for me. I'm scared. Not to mention the entire premise of Michael coming back from being the Crying Child hinges on a Silver Eyes connection, and this is the only continuity where anything remotely like that happens. And even then, there really isn't a connection there. The whole point of Silver Eyes kind of boiled down to William not being able to do what Henry ever did. Like, Henry does all these fantastical things, and William's always trying to emulate it, to try and replicate it. I mean, he couldn't make a robot kid. That was an important premise in the book. One of the whole things is that he couldn't make a robot person authentically. He couldn't do it from scratch. He had to take something Henry had already built and then trick it out with a sound disc to make it pass as a human. And even then, that person is not Mike or the Crying Child or a character even remotely like them. It is Elizabeth, who is distinctly different. Unless you want to argue that Elizabeth is the Crying Child in the Silver Eyes continuity, in which she has no comparisons for that. And that's I'm sorry, this entire thing is just ridiculous. The entire idea of that theory hinges on a connection that is never made. Not to mention, if this is a Silver Eyes parallel William, or one that's riffing on that one, that William, to my knowledge at least, or how I understood things, didn't really care about his family that much. Elizabeth's more like a means to an end to help him out here. He really just wants immortality and control over Remnant and all that junk. Not to mention, I think I pissed a minimum of 50 comments and dislikes off from that paragraph alone, so I'm going to move on. We have even more stuff playing to the whole Michael as the kid going on from FNAF 4. There is so much here that implies this narrative. To borrow John from FNAF's things, need more proof? Sister Location's secret room's code is 1983 and directly leads to the Afton House. Since Scott deliberately made the code the year 1983 and made it a code instead of something like a recording date, an old calendar, or like a picture, or something like that, we can assume this is not just a confirmation that FNAF 4 does happen in 1983, which was a question at the time, but that this is a year important to William. You don't make the code to spy on your family the current year. You make the code a year that's important to you because of something that happened in that year. I don't think it's a stretch to say that William, seeing Mike kill his other son, decides that, hey, this kid keeps running off, he keeps locking his door, keeps breaking his window. I'm gonna torment the shit out of him and monitor him at all times. Because of what Mike did in 1983, he is now being monitored. He's being locked into this room that he really can't escape. Otherwise, he has to deal with whatever the nightmares originally were, if there was any physical thing, The breaker room seems to sort of imply that they actually were real in some capacity, or at least an early prototype or counterpart to them. Maybe that's what the Night Terrors in VR is, I don't know. Point being, this whole thing is to torment and control Michael. And you may be wondering, why does it even matter that Mike is the kid in FNAF 4 beyond just solving questions? Well, let's put it simply, this culminates in his entire role in FNAF 3 forward. Now, we don't really know what capacity William made Michael go down to Central Location 4, but I'm pretty sure that William knew, with whatever instructions he left behind, that Mike was going to be going to his death. If he wanted Elizabeth to be put back together, I'm pretty sure he would have just done it. It's not like he isn't afraid to go near the animatronics himself. We see this in Save Them and Follow Me, that he really is not afraid of going near the animatronics, and is even able to dismantle them point blank. I feel like he really just sent Michael down there for either his own safety, or to help the animatronics escape there genuinely at Michael's expense, or just to keep them busy and not focus on him, or maybe if they killed Michael, they would think they killed William, which means they wouldn't be upset at him anymore. I mean, it's pretty much a win-win for William here. Either Mike succeeds and somehow puts Elizabeth back together, whatever that means, then hooray, his daughter's free or fixed or whatever. If Michael fails, he dies, and honestly that's still a win for William. Something that both MatPat and the Ultimate Guide point out is this whole poster in the Lefty scene where William is this whole puppet master and Michael is the puppet. And I think that really reflects of what Michael's role in Central Location was. He acts on the behalf of William, and basically fools into thinking he is William. I don't think Mike really had a choice in the matter. I'm pretty sure whatever FNAF 4 was, it bent Michael to William's will to some extent. And now that he's done it all, now that he's freed, he needs to figure out what happened. What is his dad doing? Which, based on the logbook, it seems like he's aware of the other spirits at some point during his quest to track his dad down. And by FNAF 3, I don't see any arguable thing where he's against William by this point. It seems like Michael's goal since this location has been to get rid of William for good, or at the very least get answers to what's going on. Maybe it was just plain spite for making him go to the Death Bunker, or maybe for the spirit's benefit based on the logbook. Now, it's worth noting that after the logbook happens, none of the MCI spirits ever attack Michael again. You could say, well, what about the Phantoms? Well, based on how FNAF 3 presented it and this whole, it's all in your mind marketing thing, and also the fact that Phone Dude says, oh man, keep that air blowing, man. You're gonna see some crazy stuff, man. I feel like that Michael, at some point after contacting Cassidy, basically got a free pass from all of the ghosts of the prior series. I mean, the only time an MCI adjacent thing ever attracts him again after this point are Molten Freddy, who thinks he's a servant or someone working for William at this point, and Lefty, who is just a janky, dangerous animatronic in general, despite the passive spirit inside of it. Oh, and when I say MCI related or MCI adjacent, I just mean any dead kid William's been responsible for. I also feel like narratively, FNAF 6 being the chronological sequel to FNAF 3 implies that Mike was trying to free the spirits with fire, since 6 does establish that fire does free or damage Remnant, and Happiest Day happens at the end of that game, or at least it was originally meant to. It's arguable whether Happiest Day did happen, but I feel like the idea was that the fire destroyed all the masks, which are the symbol of them being possessed, and that freed them. You can argue whether it did or not. The blob kind of makes that even more mysterious or unknown. But this is the last time, for a while, we see the physical masks and suit of these characters. I guess I never explained why Mike is the guard in 3. Well, firstly, the guard has to be someone who's had past experience with Freddy's based on his hallucinations. And granted, we don't know for a fact that Mike was in FNAF 2, but he was around in the time period and had a connection to Freddy's all the way back since 1983, so he definitely would have met the FNAF 2 animatronics at some point. So that adds up there. Not to mention he has a reason to want to burn Springtrap other than just scary Death Rabbit. Not to mention the entire backdrop of his monologue is Fazbear Fright after it was burned down. Not to mention Orville says, no matter how many times they burn us. Meaning someone other than Henry burned William at some point, and therefore Henry wasn't the FNAF 3 guard, and if it's not Henry, then it kind of has to be Michael via process of elimination. I mean, FNAF 6 does imply that Michael's goal is to free the rest of the spirits, and he is okay with being burned, so yeah. A funny little detail is, based on Security Breach, it seems like Michael's Pizzeria was the full scale or pretty far along. It's pretty funny if you think about it. Michael is the only person in the entire franchise who has run a Freddy's that did not involve a security guard or innocent kids or people dying at random. Everyone who dies in Pizzeria Simulator minus the lawsuits, which I don't really think anyone actually dies in. Everyone who dies in 6 was someone who was meant to be freed, or pretty much deserved it. Michael, the person who started all of this, is the only person to run Freddy's in its purest state. I mean, that's pretty much the perfect end to his story arc. Michael makes a pizzeria that works and runs well after he started all of the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. I mean, it's nothing breaking in gaming storytelling, but it's a satisfying character arc, and he has personality that isn't just flipped whenever the story needs it to be. And that's kind of a miracle, given how the story is told. Fuck this theory. I'm sorry if that's mean to people who really like this theory, but in my opinions, this would ruin both Mike and the Bite Victim's character arcs. Bite Victim is like the ultimate victim in the franchise. What makes his story work is that he is completely meek and powerless. The whole point of him being bullied was that he couldn't stand up for himself and was constantly crying. Now, on the surface level, if you're not used to writing or don't really think about writing much, that seems like a cool role reversal. Like, oh, he was the bullied, now he's the bullying, whatever. That doesn't work narratively, because that punishes the crying child by making him the villain. Anybody saying, what? No, he's getting revenge. He was the one who was bullied. No. If a character goes through the entire arc of repenting and undoing their prior actions, and is then punished for it, the Punisher is the one who's in the wrong. You want proof for this? Watch My Hero Season 6, specifically this episode, and you'll see what I'm talking about. What makes the character in that episode the bad guy is they're punishing someone for going on this whole quest of atonement and trying to make up for what they did in the past. That makes them the bad guy. Do you honestly think the crying child, by doing this, by tormenting someone who's dedicated his life and beyond to undoing his sins, is the good guy in this encounter? Do you think the narrative would make the crying child into that character who punishes someone like that? That makes the crying child a bad guy, and I cannot see a world where this story would make the character that narrative. I'm sorry, that is such a shitty way to write the character. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. Why punish Michael at all? One of the whole things the Vengeful Spirit is trying to do to the Tormented One is to make them live through something they didn't experience. This is how it feels, and now you get to experience it over and over. What's the point of tormenting Michael the way he was tormented for 50 years? That doesn't make sense. Why would he need to learn how it feels if he's already done it? Why not punish him in a different way? Why not punish him with the feeling of being in a suit? That would make sense for Michael's punishment. Punish him by making him a plushie or whatever the crying child is or ended up being, or however they ended up being Golden Freddy. Why not make him a mobile suit while he watches, I don't know, someone walk free or whatever? The punishment of being a security guard makes no sense for Michael. It isn't karmic, it doesn't make sense, it ignores the fact that the goddamn main theme of the game is the fear of your own self, the fear of yourself. It totally makes sense for William. He's being faced with his own legacy, someone who is just like him, one of his most extremely hateful victims, who would rather stay behind in anguish, which seems to be horrible based on how we described about the spirits in the books, to torment his killer. That is a reflection. Cassidy is the narrative reminder of who William is. But what the hell does this name mean if it's Michael? I'm sorry I just kind of went on a rant there, but I really don't like this theory because it's such a punishment for Michael's character for no reason. Anyway, this video is already taking a long time to make and write, so I'm going to try and wither myself out here. Let's just go over the basics of Michael's character. Michael is someone who's snarky. He cares, and he has a serious moment. He's roundabout. He's a little extravagant in subtle ways. He has a lot of humor and still this kind of pent-up seriousness and dedication to his craft and work. He is constantly chasing after his dad, who caused so much strife based on Michael's one mistake. With only 2 games of dialogue and some margin doodles in a notebook, he somehow is the most fleshed out character in my opinion. I mean, yeah, Elizabeth is pretty dynamic too, but we'll cover that in another video. Michael, however, has changed. He has character development that doesn't just erase the prior events. It builds off of them and expands upon them. He's given new directions and twists and turns and discovers this whole mystery of what his dad's done and tries to undo it. That is a dynamic and interesting character. It kind of goes beyond stuff like William Silvereyes' personality, which is, I'm crazy, obsessive, and jealous, and therefore evil and want to be immortal and strangle toddlers. What I mean is, even in the short time he's gotten, he's pretty well fleshed out. Pun, once again, absolutely intended. This entire thing was a bit of a journey to make, and I do plan on covering other characters. I mean, I cut a lot of content from this one, and I even skipped over it in the script if I knew I was going to talk about it in another video. Bye!